I'm 103 years old, and I'm about to tell you something that nobody, not your parents, not your therapist, not your self-help books, will ever tell you. And the reason they won't, because it's too painful, too stark, too real. I've been alive for over a century. I've buried 3 husbands, 2 children, most of my friends, and every single person I knew before I turned 40. I've watched the world transform 4 times over. And in all that time, I've learned one truth that haunts me every single day. We're all living like we have forever when we barely have anything at all. But let me tell you, when I actually learnt this, not at 90, not at 80, at 33 years old, and it took me 70 years to fully understand what that moment was trying to teach me. It was 1954, I was 33 years old, and I watched my mother die in a hospital bed in Cincinnati. She was 58, younger than most of you watching this right now, and in her final hours, she grabbed my hand so hard, it left bruises. She looked at me with these desperate eyes and said, "Eleanor, I never did any of it. I never did any of the things I wanted to do." She wasn't talking about travel. She wasn't talking about some bucket list. She was talking about everything. The arguments she never walked away from, the people she kept in her life who made her miserable, the things she bought to fill a hole that things could never fill, the version of herself she performed for 60 years because she was terrified of what people might think if she stopped. My mother died carrying a weight she'd been accumulating since childhood, and in that moment, standing in that cold hospital room, I understood something. I understood that she had been a prisoner her entire life, and the walls of her prison were invisible. I felt it. I knew it. But here's the thing nobody tells you about wisdom. Knowing something and living it are 2 completely different things. Because I walked out of that hospital room, and I spent the next 27 years building the exact same prison she died in. I accumulated relationships that drained me, obligations that meant nothing, possessions that owned me more than I owned them, beliefs about who I was supposed to be that kept me small and afraid and exhausted. I told myself this was just life. This was just what adulthood felt like. Everyone around me was carrying the same weight, so I thought it was normal. Have you ever known something, known it in your bones, and still not been able to act on it? I knew. For 27 years I knew. But at 60, something happened that forced me to finally listen. And what I did next, everyone thought I'd lost my mind. My own children stopped speaking to me for 2 years. The first thing I let go of was the need to be right. I spent 60 years winning arguments with people I loved, 60 years correcting grammar, correcting opinions, correcting memories. Actually, it happened on a Tuesday. No, that's not how the recipe goes. You're remembering it wrong. I was always right, and I was always alone in my rightness. You know what winning arguments with your husband gets you? A silent dinner table. You know what correcting your children gets you? Phone calls that last 3 minutes. I thought I was being helpful. I thought truth mattered more than feelings. But the truth, nobody wants to be around someone who makes them feel stupid, not even if that person is technically correct. At 60 I stopped. I just stopped. Someone would say something wrong, and I'd feel that itch, that need, and I'd let it pass. I'd let them be wrong. I'd let the world keep spinning on its incorrect axis. And you know what replaced it? Peace, real conversations, the luxury of silence that doesn't feel like a weapon. My second husband, God rest him, once told me, "Eleanor, you'd rather be right than be happy." I was furious when he said it. Took me 30 years to realize he was the only person brave enough to tell me the truth. And that leads me to the second thing, which honestly hurt even more, to give up. The second thing I let go of was people. Specific people. People I'd known my whole life. People I was related to by blood. This is the one nobody wants to talk about because we've been taught that family is forever, that you show up no matter what, that blood is thicker than water. But here's what 70 years taught me. Blood doesn't give anyone the right to drain you. I had a sister, Margaret, and for 53 years, every conversation with Margaret left me feeling smaller. She had this gift for finding the one thing you were proud of and diminishing it, the one thing you were hopeful about and poisoning it. After every phone call, I'd need an hour to recover. After every visit, I'd need a week. And I kept showing up because she was my sister, because that's what you do, because I thought the guilt of walking away would be worse than the exhaustion of staying. I was wrong. At 61, I stopped calling. I stopped visiting. I sent a letter explaining why, and I never heard back. She died 8 years later. We never spoke again. Some of you are judging me right now. I understand. I judged myself for years. But here's what nobody tells you about cutting off toxic people, even family. The guilt fades. It takes time, but it fades. And what replaces it? Energy. Energy you didn't even know you'd lost. Space in your mind that was always occupied by dread. Mornings that don't start with anxiety about what they might say or do. I grieved Margaret. Not when she died. I'd already grieved her years before. I grieved the sister I wished I'd had, and then I let her go. Now the third thing, this one will make some of you angry, but I need you to hear me out. The third thing I let go of was the pursuit of more. At 60, I gave away 80% of everything I owned. I know. That sounds extreme. That sounds like something a crazy person does. My daughter certainly thought so. Mum, you're not well. You're having some kind of episode. I wasn't having an episode. I was waking up. See, I had spent my entire adult life accumulating furniture, dishes, clothes I hadn't worn in 20 years, but kept because what if? Boxes of photographs I never looked at. My mother's china that I was too afraid to use because it might break. 3 sets of silverware. 3. And one morning I walked through my house and realized I don't own these things. These things own me. Every object was a memory I was afraid to release. Every drawer was full of guilt. Every closet was stuffed with a version of myself I was never going back to. So I started giving it away. The furniture went to neighbours. The clothes went to charity. The photographs I kept 12 photographs from an entire lifetime. The ones that made me feel something. The rest, gone. My children thought I was preparing to die. Maybe I was, but not in the way they feared. I was preparing to finally live without the weight of having. You want to know what nobody tells you about owning less. You stop worrying, you stop maintaining, you stop cleaning and organising and rearranging things that don't matter. And the space that opens up, not just in your closets, but in your mind, that space is where peace lives. We spend our whole lives buying things to fill holes that things can never fill. And then we spend the rest of our lives taking care of the things we bought. I got off that wheel at 60 and I never got back on. But getting rid of things, that was easy compared to the fourth thing I had to let go of. The fourth thing I let go of was the audience in my head. I spent 60 years performing at dinner parties, performing at church, performing for neighbours I barely knew and relatives I'd never see again. I chose my words carefully. I dressed for approval. I swallowed opinions that might make people uncomfortable. I laughed at jokes that weren't funny. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. I stayed longer than I wanted at every event I ever attended. And then one day, at 62, I realised something that changed everything. Nobody was watching. The audience I'd been performing for my entire life. It didn't exist. Everyone else was too busy performing for their imaginary audience to notice mine. I tested it. I started saying no without explanations. I stopped going to events I dreaded. I wore what I wanted. I said what I actually thought. And you know what happened? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. A few people were surprised. Most didn't even notice. And the ones who did notice, they didn't care nearly as much as I'd feared. They had their own lives, their own problems, their own performances to maintain. I'd spent 6 decades in a prison of other people's opinions, and the prison was empty. The guards were cardboard. The walls were paper. What did I gain? Myself, the actual Eleanor, not the one I thought everyone wanted. The woman who talks too loud and laughs at her own jokes and leaves parties early without apologising. The woman I'd buried at 19 and finally exhumed at 62. Do you know how exhausting it is to perform for 40 years? You don't even realise the weight until you set it down. Now, number 5 is the one that changed everything, and I mean everything. The 5th thing I let go of was the most dangerous belief I ever held. The belief that happiness was somewhere else, someday else, someone else. I'll be happy when I retire. I'll be happy when the kids are grown. I'll be happy when we pay off the house. I'll be happy when my health improves. I'll be happy when I spent 60 years chasing a horizon that kept moving. And then one Tuesday, and I remember it was a Tuesday because nothing special happened, nothing at all. I was sitting in my kitchen, 63 years old, alone, drinking tea that had gone cold. The sink was full of dishes. The radio was playing something I didn't recognize, and for no reason I can explain. I thought, what if this is it? Not what if this is all I get, in a sad way, but what if this cold tea, this quiet kitchen, this ordinary moment, what if this is where happiness actually lives? What if I've been stepping over it my whole life while looking for something bigger? That thought broke something open in me. I realized I had been waiting my entire life. I had been waiting for circumstances to arrange themselves, for permission, for later, and later never comes. It never does. There is only now. There is only this. Happiness isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a decision you make with whatever you have, wherever you are. Even if it's a Tuesday and your tea is cold and nothing is happening at all. After that morning, I stopped waiting. I stopped postponing joy until conditions were perfect, because conditions are never perfect, and joy that requires perfect conditions isn't joy, it's hostage negotiation. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. The 6th thing I let go of. Most people will never be brave enough to do this. The 6th thing I let go of was a grudge I'd been carrying for 41 years. In 1959, my best friend slept with my first husband. They didn't just have an affair, they fell in love. He left me for her. They got married. They had children together, and for 41 years, I hated them both with a fury that never dimmed. I replayed it constantly, the discovery, the confrontation, the things she said, the look on his face. I kept those memories polished, like weapons I might need someday. And you know what? They moved on. They built a life. They were happy, or at least they looked happy from what I heard, through mutual friends. And I was still there, stuck in 1959, replaying a wound that had long since scarred over for everyone except me. You've heard the saying, resentment is drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. I drank that poison for 4 decades, and the only person it was killing was me. At 64, I wrote them a letter. Both of them, not to reconcile, not to get an apology I knew would never come. I wrote it for me. I wrote everything I'd never said, every cruel thought, every fantasy of revenge, every way they'd broken something in me I thought couldn't be fixed. And then I burned it. I never sent it. That wasn't the point. The point was that I finally put it down. After 41 years of carrying it, I just set it on the ground and walked away. And here's what I didn't expect, the space that opened up. I didn't realize how much of my mind was occupied by that old wound, how much energy I was spending every single day maintaining a hatred that they didn't even know about. Forgiveness isn't about them. It was never about them. It's about deciding that your peace matters more than your pain. And finally, the seventh thing, this is the hardest one and the most important. The seventh thing I let go of was my fear of death. And I know how that sounds. How do you stop fearing the one thing that's guaranteed to happen? The one thing none of us escapes. But here's what I realized. I wasn't just afraid of dying. I was so afraid of dying that I had forgotten to live. I spent decades avoiding anything that reminded me of mortality. I didn't visit sick friends because it made me uncomfortable. I changed the channel when death came up on the news. I refused to write a will until I was 70 because I thought putting it on paper would somehow make it real. I was living like if I just ignored death long enough, maybe it would ignore me too. It doesn't work that way. At 67, my second husband, Richard, was diagnosed with lung cancer. 8 months later, he was gone. And in those 8 months, I watched a man who had always been afraid of failure, afraid of judgment, afraid of being seen, become the most alive person I'd ever known. Because he knew it was ending. And that knowing didn't destroy him, it freed him. He said things he'd never said. He laughed at things that used to worry him. He stopped caring what anyone thought and started caring about what actually mattered. Richard taught me something in those 8 months that 70 years of living hadn't. Death isn't the opposite of life. Death is what makes life precious. Without an ending, nothing means anything. After Richard died, I stopped running. I stopped pretending I had forever. I started living like someone who knows the clock is ticking because it is. For all of us. And what did I gain? Everything. Urgency, presence, gratitude for ordinary mornings, freedom from the small stuff that used to consume me, the ability to say I love you without embarrassment and no without guilt. When you accept that you're going to die, really accept it, not as an idea but as a fact. You stop wasting time, you stop waiting, you stop carrying things that don't matter. You finally start living. Now, remember what I told you at the beginning about what happened when I was 33, about watching my mother die in that hospital room. Let me tell you the full story. My mother's last words to me weren't, "I love you." They were, "Eleanor, I never did any of it." And in that moment, standing in that hospital room in Cincinnati, watching the life drain out of a woman who had spent 58 years accumulating resentment, accumulating possessions, accumulating the opinions of people who didn't matter, accumulating a version of herself she thought she was supposed to be. I understood something. I understood that she had wasted her life carrying things she could have set down at any moment. And I walked out of that hospital room and I swore I wouldn't make the same mistake. But I did. For 27 years, I made the exact same mistake because knowing isn't the same as doing, because fear is comfortable, because the weight you've always carried starts to feel like part of your body, because everyone around you is carrying the same weight, and you think that's just what life is. I was 60 years old before I finally understood what my mother was trying to tell me with her dying breath. Happiness isn't about adding more to your life. It's about having the courage to subtract everything I let go of, the need to be right, the toxic people, the possessions, the opinions, the waiting, the grudges, the fear. Every single one of those things was something I thought I needed. And the moment I released it, I realized it was the thing keeping me from peace. I wasted 27 years. You don't have to. You don't have to wait until you're 60. You don't have to wait until you get a diagnosis. You don't have to wait until someone you love dies in front of you and speaks their regret with their final breath. You can start today, right now, with one thing, just one. What are you carrying that you could set down? What argument are you holding on to? What person is draining you? What belief about happiness is keeping you stuck? You know, you already know, just like I knew at 33. The only question is, will you wait another 27 years to act on it? I'm 103 years old. I've buried 3 husbands, 2 children, and everyone I knew before I turned 40. And I'm telling you, from the other side of a century, the things you're holding on to are not keeping you safe. They're keeping you small. Set them down while you still can. This channel shares stories from people who've lived long enough to learn what matters. If this helped you, I hope you'll subscribe and turn on notifications. We share new stories every week. And if you've got wisdom worth sharing, something you've learned the hard way that might help someone else, there's a form in the description below. Maybe next time it'll be your story, helping someone find their way.